The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Say it ain't so. Let's talk about it. And look, if this one don't hit for you, you just might be destined for poverty.
I guess I got my swagger back. Truth.
See, a lot of people think that the phrase the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer is just some sort of function of some evil capitalism, right? But in reality, it's really just a function of our monetary policy in this country. So what do I mean by that? What it really just means is that it's really just a function of how the Fed is controlling the money supply in our country. So most of the world is operating on a fiat money system, right? So fiat essentially just means by government decree, right? So that essentially means that this dollar, this money has value because the government says that it has value. So the US dollar only has value because the US government and the Federal Reserve says that it has a certain amount of value. It's not actually backed by anything, right? It used to be backed by gold, but in 1971, Nixon took the US off of the gold standard. So now the dollar is essentially only as good as what they say it's worth. But here in the US, since the US dollar is the global reserve currency of the world, and it's also backed by, you know, one of the best economies and if not the strongest military in the world, people believe that the US dollar has value. But the problem with the fiat money system is that it can be extremely inflationary, right? Meaning that your dollars lose value over time and prices essentially go up over time. So in a fiat system like we live in, whenever there's any sort of economic downturn or any sort of recession, the government essentially implements the monetary policy of printing more money in order to stimulate the economy and lift us out of that recessionary period. In fact, let's just rewind back to the infamous date of March of 2020, whenever a global pandemic struck the world and the US economy essentially entered into a recessionary period. Stock prices immediately began plummeting. So how did the government respond to this?
Can you characterize everything that the Fed has done this past week as essentially flooding the system with money?
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
There is no end to our ability to do that.
They responded by printing over $9 trillion and counting of money to inject back into the economy. And that almost instantly allowed a lot of the stock prices to recover really quickly. But see, we got to ask ourselves, why did the stock prices actually go up just by the government injecting or printing money into the economy? I mean, let's think about why the government actually prints money for economic stimulus. Like, why do they actually do that? So whenever the government prints money and implements their monetary policy, essentially what happens is interest rates begin to drop, right? So that makes traditionally safe investments like CDs and bonds and those kind of things, it makes those safe investments even less appealing because now they're even getting a lower return, right? Because those are based off of a lot of the interest rates, right? So when that happens, a lot of investors that had money into those sort of investments are now looking to put their money into more aggressive investments, right? So typically what they'll do is take money out of those safer investments, take money out the bank and put it into more aggressive investments like stocks, right? And so when that happens, when more people start buying stocks, what does that mean? The stock prices rise, right? Because now the demand is increasing. So if we go back to that March of 2020 date and we see that, you know, stock prices essentially plummeted, within 2 months they had recovered. By the end of May, they were back to where they were pre-pandemic. I mean, let's really think about that. Typically when a stock price goes up, it's because a company becomes more valuable, right? But what did a lot of these companies do to actually become more valuable, right? A 30% increase in value. What did they do in that time period? I mean, think about it. What did they actually do? They didn't do anything. So it's not that these companies became worth more. It's that the dollars that they're priced in became worth less. So it essentially takes more dollars than it took before to buy one share of the same company. I mean, let's look at Apple. In February of 2020, Apple was at about $80 a share, right? Right before everything happened. Everything tanks, they get down to about $57 a share in the end of March, and within 2 months, they're back trading at $80 a share. Did Apple really do anything to become more valuable over that time? Or did those dollars that Apple is priced in become worth less, meaning it takes more dollars to buy the same asset? So if everything's priced in dollars, that means it's gonna take more dollars to buy anything. So the prices of everything is rising whenever there's more money put into the economy. Your dollars are essentially becoming worth less, so it takes more of them to buy anything. What is that called? It's called inflation, as we've all learned, right? The prices of things go up over time, dollars become worth less. And so why is this important? See, this is what I really want to get into. So if you still rocking with me now, hit that thumbs up button. See, inflation impacts the wealthy very differently than how it impacts the poor. A lot of people that are poor and middle class don't even realize that the dollars that they have today are becoming worth less every single day. So next year, they're not going to be worth the same amount that they're worth today. Why is that important? It's because the poor only have cash. That's the only asset that they actually own. They don't own any stocks. They don't own any real estate. They don't own any gold. They don't own any cryptocurrency. They don't own any other assets that actually appreciate or increase in value over time. They only own cash, which is decreasing in value over time, as we just talked about. I mean, we've all heard many Americans can barely cover a $400 expense, right? They're living paycheck to paycheck. So that means all they're holding on to is cash. If they have anything, it's going to be cash, right? They estimate that nearly 40 to 45% of people own no appreciating assets like stocks or real estate. They only own cash. So over time, these people are becoming poorer and poorer because their only asset that they own, which is cash, is losing value. And this is why a lot of poor people feel like they can never get ahead. It's because the cash that they have today is not going to be worth the same amount tomorrow, right? And on top of that, they don't have any wage adjusted salaries, right? So if they were making $10 an hour this year, next year they might be making $10.50 an hour. That's not enough to even combat what people believe inflation is. And then conversely, rich people, wealthy people, they hold no cash. Most of their wealth is in assets that increase in value over time or appreciate over time. Because they know that the value of the dollar is going down. That means it's going to take more dollars to buy this same asset in the future. It's not that the assets are actually improving, it's that the dollars become worth less over time. I mean, think about it. If I bought a house in 1980, 40 years later in 2020, it's now double the value, but I hadn't put anything into it as far as repairs or renovations. Did the house actually get better, or did the dollars lose value? It's the fact that the dollars lost value, so now it takes more dollars to buy that same house. The house didn't itself get better. So the rich benefit from inflation while the poor get crushed by inflation. And this is why I say that savers are losers, because when you save money, you save cash, you're losing money. I'm not calling you a loser. I mean, maybe I was, but primarily you're losing value in your dollars over time. That's why savers are losers. You're literally losing. People estimate that inflation is usually around 2 to 3%, which is probably a lot higher, but whenever money gets printed, that amount is even exasperated and it's increased now, because now you're essentially forcing inflation as opposed to natural inflation. So whenever a recession hits, that's why the wealthy always become wealthier, because when the government prints money, they are holding on to assets that are going to take more dollars to buy in the future. I mean, think about it. How is it that billionaires gained hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of wealth last year in a period of a few months, while millions of people were losing their jobs and could barely even pay their rent? It's not that they did anything differently in that moment. The only thing they did differently is that they were holding on to assets, or their money was in assets, their dollars were in assets that are now going to take more dollars to buy. So they gained wealth while the poor and the middle class got poorer. And so stimulus packages actually make the wealthier wealthier while the poor get poorer. And see, this is why the lack of financial education and financial literacy is a national emergency, or should be a national emergency. Because I would bet you if you went out into the street and you surveyed 100 people, random people, a majority of them would not even know that the dollars in their wallet or the dollars in their bank account today will be worth less next year. They won't even know it, but yet that's all they have. And see, the media's not going to call this out, right? Because they know that positivity and those kind of things don't sell. Wall Street's not going to call it out for sure, because they know that this kind of stuff is lining their pockets. So what does that mean? It's up to you to be educated and to know that this is happening. So now, if you've watched up to this point, then you are now aware of what's going on, right? You're aware of what's happening every single year with your dollars. And see, that's the first step to improving. It's now the awareness. So in my next video, I'm going to talk about what I personally just did to hedge myself against this money printing phenomena that's going on right now. So like I said, if this one did hit for you, poverty might be in your future. I hope not, but a light bulb should have definitely clicked in your head after listening to this. But anyways, that's it for this video. Hope you gained something of value. If you did, hit that thumbs up button for the YouTube algorithm, and be sure to share this with at least a couple people. Send this to your friends, send this to your family. People need to know about this. This is happening and people are not aware, and they're becoming poorer and poorer while the rich are getting richer. So I need you to join the rich. Don't get mad at the rich. We got to join the rich.